Welcome artists to Monet Cafe Studio and this lesson where I'm going to teach you my easy way to start a pastel painting. I'm calling this one Winter's Promise. I'm going to begin with a monochromatic underpainting and I'll teach you why it's a great way to start. I'll also describe my easy 3-color triadic color palette. It's a way to bring color harmony to your painting. And that's not all. Throughout this lesson, I'll be describing my layering techniques to bring life to this beautiful winter scene and oh, so much more. So come on into the studio, my friends, and let's get started. The theme this month in Monet Cafe and for my patrons on my Patreon page is Winter Wonderland. And I'm here on a site called Unsplash. You can get the app or view it on the computer, unsplash.com. It's a great way to get copyright-free reference images. And for my patrons on my Patreon page, I've curated some albums, Christmas, Snowman, Winter. And I actually let my husband choose this picture. I said, which one do you like the best? And he chose this beautiful scene of a snowy road with some pine trees lining the road. I really loved this one, and I actually altered it a little bit in some photo editing apps and changed the color a little bit. And I want to talk to you about my triadic color palette and why it's a really great way to approach a painting with a color palette strategy. Here is the image where I've basically just increased the saturation. That is a really great way for you to edit a photo to see some of the main colors in the image. Now I'm going to zoom in on it here and kind of hone in on some of the colors that I'm seeing. And in this image, once I saturated it, I could see that it kind of naturally leaned towards a triadic color palette. And the colors that I saw immediately, you can probably see them too. Can you see some violets? All computer screens are different, but I'm seeing some violets. Are you seeing some teals, like deep blue, almost turquoise colors, even in some of the shadows? And also seeing some beautiful orangey colors. Can you see that in some of the rocks and the trees? So let me take you over to the color wheel and show you how this works and how to apply it in your paintings. I talk often about complementary color palettes, and often I talk about why we put down a beautiful orange color for an underpainting if we're going to be doing a lot of landscapes. The reason is anything opposite on the color wheel is called a complement or a complementary color. Think of them as opposites. And the opposite of orangey colors like this is blues, violets, and greens, kind of over in this area, but typically like in here, blues and greens. So that's why we often lay down an underpainting of these colors, because it's going to make these colors really pop. Okay, so that's a 2-color kind of color scheme, complementary color. Now there is something called a triad, and a triad is 3. It's actually right here on the color wheel. This, I call it your handy dandy color guide or friend. It's just called the pocket color wheel, but it has so much information on it. And one of the things I like is this little color scheme graphic here. Notice the triangle. The triangle is going to show you, it's kind of lined up where I want it almost. Let's see here. Yeah. It's going to show you the points of the triangle to choose your colors. And you don't have to be exact. You can bend a little bit. But like I said, I liked the beautiful kind of purpley red violets. Okay. Remember I was talking about those colors being in the image. I also talked about kind of like some leans a little more orange and brownish colors. And then also kind of like some teal blues. It's kind of in between these two here. So we've got kind of like a little triad color scheme of violets and red violets, turquoisey blues, and kind of some rusty browns and orangey colors in here in the trees. So that is why I think it just very easily felt so beautiful to me. It had a very cohesive and beautiful color palette arrangement already. So those are the colors that I'm going with, and I'm going to show you some of my soft pastel choices. These are some of my initial selections before beginning. You notice in the first column I have some beautiful violets and lavenders. These are going to be great for some of the shadows in the snow. The second column has some of my turquoise and teal colors. Again, great for some of the shadowy colors, some of the sky. And in the third column, I have some of my orangey colors, leaning some of them a little more magenta. And the fourth column are my neutrals. I go into these colors even more over on my Patreon version of this tutorial, but I at least wanted to show you some of my initial selections. Now, I did find a gorgeous turquoise color. It's by the Luda Pastel Company. It's a wonderful company from Romania. And look at that, those two turquoise colors on the top right there. This one is 35L, and I thought it was the perfect color for some of those sky holes in the deep parts of the tree. And now we're going to get started on that underpainting. That once again is a really easy way to start a pastel painting. Now I want to give a little station break real quick. I always like to give plenty of free content here on the Monet Cafe channel, but if you want the extra goodies I'm always talking about over on my Patreon page, it's real easy to become a patron. It's only $5 a month. You unlock hundreds of lessons with more content, and you become part of my Patreon family. And my favorite part, I get to see your work as well. All right, everyone, let's continue. The surface I'm working on is a water-friendly surface, and if you're doing the technique, this underpainting technique, exactly like I'm doing, you will have to use a water-friendly surface. But as I always say, get creative and use what you have. This is a surface I love. It's called Pastel Matte. I love that it comes in multiple colors. And remember when I was talking about the complementary color strategy using the color wheel? I chose a color that is a buttery color. It's called Maize. It's almost like a little light butter color. And I thought that base color would be the perfect complement to many of the cooler colors that I'll be using for this beautiful snow scene. The product I'm using to create the underpainting is acrylic ink. This is a color called Sepia by Daler Rowney, and it's just a nice earthy brown. I thought it also would be great because some of these trees, you know, have kind of that brownish color to it. And I like doing this in a technique that I'd like to show you. It works really well for me. I'm basically going to be creating a monochromatic value study with this one color. And what I do is I put it full strength in one little dish. The second, oh, by the way, these dishes are from Walmart. I think it's the Pioneer Woman, is that the name of it, collection? And I use these little dishes all the time. But in the middle dish, I will add some water. I put a little brush full in the middle dish and a little brush full in the third dish. And I just add a little more water to each one. So I have 3 different degrees of value. You'll kind of see this as I'm painting. Now, I had a bunch of brushes down here, but this is the brush I ended up using. It's called a bamboo brush, and it's a little strange. I heard an artist describe this as it's like painting with a puppy dog's tail. It's really kind of floppy, but it kind of helped me to keep things very loose and painterly, but use whatever brush you have. And now I'm going to get started with this underpainting. Oh, and I keep some paper towels handy too. I use those a lot to blot my brush off. This is where I added a little water to the middle one with some of the color. And I'm just using this brush. Notice that I'm trying to keep my strokes a little bit broken. I don't want just a solid straight line. You'll notice that more as I add more of these tree trunks. Now you can see I did do a very light pencil sketch underneath. I just kind of wanted it to be easy and have some information down first. I don't always do a sketch, but this allowed me to paint a little bit faster. And also keep your trees or give them personality. Make them kind of leaning and just not always straight up and down. And I'm using this still kind of in a darker to middle dark value, but notice how I just changed it. I added more water to my third dish with just a little bit of the sepia. The reason is, look in the reference image. Can you see those distant trees? Look how light they are in value. If you squint your eyes, you can see they're a lot lighter than the trees or the tree trunks in the foreground. But over, now I'm making the tree trunks a little bit darker, and that's one great thing. You can always darken things up. up. By the way, on the Patreon page, this whole portion is a lot slower and I describe things even more. But again, I still love to give you guys some good free content. The shadow going across the road is obviously a little bit lighter in value than the tree trunks. And there's a lot of dark value though up in the top parts. I blotted it off. I had it a little too dark to begin with. But I think sometimes when I speed it up like this, you can really see it coming to life. And you can see that I'm really getting a lot of information down and a wonderful value study, a monochromatic value study that makes my painting so much easier when I get started. Before we begin with the pastel painting portion, I wanted to share something I'm so excited about. It's my new book, Artistic Inspirations. It's now available on Amazon. I think it's a perfect Christmas gift for yourself or someone else you love, and it is my blending of two of my favorite loves, art and scripture, and I think it will inspire creativity and joy. I'll have a clickable link to check it out in the upper right section of this video here and in the description of this video. All right, let's start with these pastels. The pastel portion of this is sped up a bit. It is a lot of real time over on my Patreon page, but you can still get a lot from my commentary here. I'm just using some darker colors in the trees, really just looking at the shapes. I can tell they're pine trees and the pine needles are kind of growing downwards. And so I got in some of my darks, and now my darkest values I can tell are the tree trunks. And I'm same strategy as with it using the acrylic ink. I'm just trying to keep my lines kind of broken and lyrical, and some of the trees leaning. And when you see me putting my fingers on the painting and on the reference image, it's kind of a way that I do some measuring. So now I'm turning my darker pastel on its side and still getting in some of those dark areas. Squint your eyes and look at the reference image, and you can see there's a mass of dark in the trees. From the left to the right, it kind of goes wider as you get to the right. So I'm just kind of, that's called blocking in. I'm just blocking in some of these values. And I use my right hand in this painting, even though I'm left-handed, because my camera, sometimes it's easier for me to paint with my right hand. And then I realized it's really kind of nice to paint with both hands. So I started painting with both my right and my left hand. It's very convenient, actually. So now I'm getting in some of the other values. These are a little bit more of the blues and the teals. And this is, I would say, a medium value. So far, I've gotten in mostly of the darker values. So I'm getting more of the distant trees. Now, they're a little darker right now than they will be. And that's kind of typical how we layer with soft pastels. We often layer multiple colors to get a final color or final value, and colors are much more interesting that way. And so I will be layering some other colors on top of those distant trees to lighten them up. Now, this was also a great color to get the shadow of that road. And I also like to go ahead and get in a little bit of the darkest values, a little bit of the middle values, and a little bit of the light values when I'm kind of starting a painting. And it kind of gives me more of a wholeness to the painting and where my general dark, middle, and light values are. Now, I know one of the lightest areas in this painting is going to be that distant area at the end of the road. I think that's why I like this composition. I love a composition where things are just really receding into the distance. Now I'm moving on to some of those pretty kind of lavendery violet colors I mentioned. Don't they look pretty with those turquoise colors? Like I said, it's great to kind of have a color palette strategy when you start, and it just makes the painting really feel connected and makes it easier to paint too. So now I'm getting down that, see that, I have the image on my easel here, you can see now. It has kind of a dark shadow on the front of the road, and I use two colors. I use kind of a turquoisey blue and kind of a periwinkle color. And now I'm just focusing on value right now. I already have my pastels kind of laid out. So I also knew that I wanted to bring a little sunshine into this painting. That's one of the reasons I also chose that pretty buttery surface color. But I'm going to be adding a little bit more yellow to the foreground part of the road. Here it is right here. I was seeing just a little influence of sunshine peeking through those spaces between the trees, specifically in the foreground. Now, I am coming in with some of my magenta colors. Remember, I talked about those pretty violet kind of magentas, and I am seeing that influence in the reference image and in these rocks. And this is where I'm beginning to warm things up. Everything so far has been a little bit on the cool end of the color palette. And I decided to warm it up even more with a little bit of an orangey color. Again, I had edited the reference image, so my colors were a little punchier and a little more fun. Now, they're not going to stay this bold, okay? That's back to that process of layering. I'm already working with a little bit of a darker, neutral magenta color that I'm incorporating some of that into the upper leaves or pine needles up in the trees. Now, what I'm doing here is called color echoing, where you use the same color in different areas of your painting to bring harmony to it. And before getting too detailed in any one area, I like to try to work the whole. So I still do have some spaces and places that I need to get covered with the correct value. And I stress value over color all the time. If you have your colors correct, like you have the right colors in your painting, but your values are off. Value just means the lightness or darkness of whatever that element is. Your painting's not going to look right. But if you have your values right and your colors are a little off or a little different from your image, it will still read as more correct than if your values are off. And the great thing is, you can get very creative with color when you learn that principle of using the right values. I just had one of my patrons give me a great comment. She says, "Thank you so much. I'm a beginner artist. Thank you so much for talking about values. It's really finally starting to click." And I shared with her that I probably share so much about it because I didn't understand it when I first got started. I'm totally self-taught. That's how this channel started. I just started sharing my pastel painting journey here on YouTube, and there you go. Here we are today. I'm getting to where I have most of the painting blocked in, and I'm starting to kind of really analyze some of the values and elements in the painting. I am going to tackle those upper tree pine needles at the end of the painting and add some pretty negative spaces with that turquoise color in between some of those pine needles. Now I'm working a little bit more on those trees in the distance. I wanted to kind of neutralize the color a little more. I did have to finish that sky to the left. I kind of fiddle with this a lot. There was some negative spacing and some light on the left side there of that distant tree, and I didn't want to give it too much of a light value or too much attention because if you give too much of a contrast or detail at the edges of your painting, it can lead your viewer right out of your painting, like that little tree trunk I just did over there. I don't want to have it too dark. I think I lighten it later. We want to keep most of our detail and our interest and our contrast in the focal point areas of the painting, which is almost never the edge of a painting. So now I'm just still kind of getting in some of these pretty snow colors. Again, that pretty teals and violet colors, lavender colors. And now I'm looking for areas of light. I'm trying to be careful on this right side around these rocks because it was still quite shadowy, but you can see that the light, the highlights are just kind of sprinkled throughout this painting, but most specifically in the foreground area and in the sky in the distance. And here's where I'm first beginning to use that pretty, or one of those pretty turquoise colors from the Luda set. I slowed it down a bit so you could watch my mark making. And I'm looking just for little subtle influences or where this value will work in the painting. And I think you will see that this is what's going to bring this painting to life, and how I'm still using that same color palette concept of the triadic or the triad color palette. Now I'm using a little piece of it's a chamois cloth, like you dry your cars with, to blend some of these tree needles. I want to kind of cover most of the space. I had a lot of the surface actually still showing through, and I'm going to come back in and carve negatively some of the sky peeking through. And I'm still adding a little bit more of the yellow And also I'm going to add a little bit more of the turquoise as well. Anywhere I see it might just make this painting pop. And even though this pastel looks kind of blue in my hand, it's really kind of a violet. You can see it when I add it to these distant trees. And I definitely was seeing little hints of that color kind of deep into the distance of some of the trees on the right-hand side. So now this is when it gets fun, because I can I know I'm getting close to finishing. I don't want to overwork this painting. I was still seeing a little bit of warmth in the pine needles up high, so I added some of that up high, and there was a little influence of green. I didn't want to overdo it because I wanted to kind of stay tight or a little close with this color palette strategy, but there was a little hint of green in there, so I thought I'd just touch on that just a little bit. Now I've zoomed in again and slowed things down just a little bit to show you this concept of negative painting. It's also called sky holes. And rather than trying to paint these pine needles, and it's kind of a big old mass of tree needles all over, it would be hard to paint all around those little spaces. So what I do is I paint the general values that I see in kind of directional strokes to emulate the pine needles, and I carve into the positive shape. I carve these negative spaces, again, called sky holes, literally because it's like the sky is peeking through. And so I was combining a little bit of this blue with some of the teal colors. I thought it kind of made it vibrate a little bit more, and I think maybe you can see that happening. So now I'm speeding it back up again. There was more light coming through this left pine tree up at the top, so I went a little lighter with my turquoise color, and it's a little bit of a trick to get the knack of sky holes. I'm still not awesome at it, but I'm a lot better than when I started. I just, kept at it. And finally, like I said, with the value concept, it starts to make sense and you start to get better. And that's the way to do it, artists. You keep having fun, for one. I always say that. But don't be so hard on yourself and think you have to be perfect when you start. We're going to have, I don't even like to call paintings failures. They're all learning opportunities. Oh, I did add a little bit of what felt like snow on some of the pine needles. So you can do it. Make sure you just have fun and do some small studies. And before you know it, you'll look up and go, wow, did I paint that? And that's what I love about being able to see the progress of my Patreon family over on my Patreon page. All right, now I'm going to show you the photograph, the before photograph. This was the one that was a little saturated with color, but I'm going to show you the actual painting now. And I think you'll see how I enhanced the colors with that triadic color palette in mind. Can you see the teals, the violets, and the orange colors? It's a really simple strategy, but I think it really makes a painting come to life. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and learned something, of course. And again, if you'd like to become a patron, there's a link right here. There's always a link in the description of my video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, God bless and happy painting.